I don't play humans in MMOs. Actually, that's already not true. I find humans in Guild Wars 2 very interesting, just because they are the aliens of that universe. They came from somewhere that we don't know about, and they arrived on the planet. But different franchise, different game, maybe that's a video for another time. Having said that though, the humans of World of Warcraft are pretty amazing and interesting in themselves, and the Alliance wouldn't really exist without them. They're varied and splintered, and in this video I'm going to try and go back all the way to the beginning of the human race in World of Warcraft and sort it all out in my head, and hopefully yours as well. Shout out to Adam Froggatt in the community tab, who pointed out that a video on human lore would actually go really well, because we've been talking about a lot of Titan stuff lately, and you'll see how that's relevant in just a second. But it also fits in nicely just before the Forsaken. Of course, the Forsaken come from primarily the humans of World of Warcraft, but again, we'll get to that eventually. Maybe this needs to be 2 videos, we'll see. I have a feeling this is going to be a long one. Shall we get into it? Let's get into it. Humans as we know them are descended from a Titan-created race called the Vrykul. Very sort of tall, broad, Viking-y looking proto-humans, if you like. And the Vrykul worship the Titans as gods, pretty much, when they were first created. Around 15,000 years ago, before the game as we know it, the Vrykul of the Dragon Flayer clan began to believe that their gods, the Titans, had betrayed them, or abandoned them, depending on how you want to look at it. And this was because some of the Vrykul were being born weak and ugly. If you remember back to my video about the dwarves, you remember that they were originally made of stone, of the earth itself. In a similar way, Vrykul were usually born strong and broad and huge, and some of them were getting weaker and frailer just as the generations were going on. What this actually was the curse of flesh. And if you want to know a bit more about the curse of flesh, definitely check out the dwarf video. I go into a lot of detail on that over there. The Vrykul king Yimiron ordered for these weak and frail children to be disposed of. And the punishment for not doing so was that the parents of these children would also be killed alongside them. There's actually a famous Vrykul called Skadi the Ruthless, and he earned that title by doing exactly this, hunting down the weakened children of his fellow Vrykul. But even despite all this, not all of the Vrykul parents complied with the orders. They hid their children away and ended up raising families in what is now known as Northrend. Some legends say that it was the Titan keeper Tyr who guided them to Northrend, but in any case, parents would send their children there because that's where Tyr's tomb was. And his legend, which again I've made a whole video about, inspired their people for generations to come. These new, weaker humans kind of struggled to survive at first. They only had the few supplies that their Vrykul parents had sent them off with. But they would still hold on to their culture however they could by gathering around fires and reading the scrolls and tomes of their people, ancient legends of heroes and leaders. In fact, one spoke of a great leader who lost his right hand in an effort to fight against unfathomable evil. When he lost his hand, he chose to replace it with one of pure silver instead of regenerating the hand, which he actually did have the power to do. By passing down these stories, it taught the lesson that true order and justice can only be accomplished through personal sacrifice. And of course, that hero was Tyr, the legend that their parents knew of, and the whole reason they had been sent to Northrend in the first place. In any case, these early humans went through some serious hardships as they were trying to find their way. They were found by the Night Elf Empire and actually used as slaves by those elves. Eventually though, early humans began to gather together and form tribes. These tribes settled and staked their lands in the area that will eventually be known as Lordaeron in the Eastern Kingdoms. Some of these tribes were the Arathi, the Alteraci, and the followers of Lordain, each one having their own distinct culture. At this point, magic wasn't really known to humans. They had very crude and earthy forms of magic like druidism, shamanism, because they had no exposure to the arcane just yet, or even the holy light. Interesting to note here that the Tyr's Guard, so the group that guarded Tyr's tomb after he fell, were mostly Vrykul, but as the Vrykul started dying out, they began to add humans to their ranks. So it was for a while, but then skipping ahead a few thousand years, it was around the time of the Troll Wars, about 2,800 years ago, that humans really stepped up to the plate and became part of the history of Azeroth. Concerned that the forest trolls were really becoming a threat, the Arathi tribe attempted to overthrow them and retain their land through combat and politics. Politics will come up a lot during this human lore video. But also, by offering equality and peace to the smaller human tribes that they conquered, they were able to form the nation of Arathor and build the capital of Strom. And Strom was so great and awesome that even the humans that had settled in what would eventually become Lordaeron would travel to Strom just for its security and its protection. In the meantime, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas were fighting the trolls head-on, and they weren't doing so well on that front. They were close to being defeated, and they called out to Strom for aid, pleading for help from the king at the time, Thoradin. In exchange for that support, the High Elves promised to teach no more than 100 humans the secrets of magic. Together, the two forces beat the trolls and achieved peace across the Eastern Kingdom for several centuries. There was still some fracturing, though. Wealth and prosperity increased across Arathor, and it would eventually split into separate city-states, like Gilneas, for instance, to the west, Alterac, Dalaran, Lordaeron to the northwest, Kultiras to the southwest, and Stormwind to the south. Strom endured and remained powerful, though, and eventually it was renamed to Stromgarde. And of course, because of politics, the kingdoms would always be poking at each other, so they weren't in open war, but, they liked to rattle each other's bones every so often. So in the decades before the First War, there would be intrigue, squabbles within kingdoms, and there would also be a lot of trade with dwarves, gnomes, and elves. Lordaeron would often act as the regional leader and mediate disagreements, of which there were a lot, I suppose, and keep order in the land. Eventually, though, disaster struck, and the Orcish horde appeared on Azeroth through the Dark Portal. And during that first war between orcs and humans, they flattened Stormwind easily. The survivors, including the young Prince Varian Rin, fled to Lordaeron, where all of the 7 human kingdoms put aside their differences to combat what was a huge threat to them. This was known as the Alliance of Lordaeron, and together they helped to defeat the orcs and all of their allies during the Second War. The peace that came after all of that didn't last very long, though. As always, the kingdoms found a way to squabble between each other. Costs for maintaining the alliance were high. Gilneas and Stromgarde wouldn't pay their taxes, and they withdrew their membership. And then various other groups of humans would splinter off after some issues with liberating orcs from internment camps that had been set up. Eventually, by the time of the Third War, human and high elf mages were looking to Dalaran for leadership. Dalaran being a city of learning and magic and the arcane. To make it even worse, the kingdom of Lordaeron was eventually demolished by a plague that swept through it. It killed thousands of humans and converted them into the undead servants of the Lich King. The Prince of Lordaeron at the time, Arthas Menethil, would be manipulated by the Lich King, causing him to kill his father Terenas, and eventually eradicating humanity in Lordaeron altogether. But I think you'll agree, Arthas deserves his own video. I'm sure that'll be coming up eventually. Over time, Arthas would travel to Northrend to merge with his master, the Lich King, and for 5 years after that would remain plotting and planning and building his armies. And that's where I'll pause for now. We've gone all the way back to the ancient Titan origins of the humans, how they came from their Vrykul ancestors and found a name for themselves in Northrend and in Azeroth as a whole, mostly through conflict and politics, and then by splintering off into a million different human kingdoms all across the Eastern Kingdoms. But still. We've also learned a little bit about the conflicts that they faced between each other and towards the orcs. We'll pick up and we'll take them all the way to the present day in the next part, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are you a human player in World of Warcraft, and do you enjoy them? Do you like playing a human even though you are one? Please don't hesitate to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe if you haven't already. You know, as always, it means the world to me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the second part.